You know, and being grateful, having a little book by my bed that I'd write 3 things to be grateful for every night. And obviously the basics like exercise and healthy diet and meditation and yoga and all those sorts of things. But I think, you know, it really is about work. And I think we're not really taught that to be happy might need work. And I think, you know, it's really that sustained effort of prioritizing, certainly prioritizing my own mental health, but also my spiritual health and my physical health and my emotional health, and committing to that and prioritizing that. And I still do, you know, and it's an ever evolving thing. And I think that you know, I wanted some epiphany that I would suddenly wake up and be fixed, and it would, you know, and my sign was going to be that I would get married and have children, and that was going to be the thing that proved to me that I was kind of fixed and better. And I realized that that's very much not the case. And I think, you know, we're sort of taught in our society to have that kind of, that things come easy and that we don't necessarily have to commit or make effort to actually be happy. And I think that's not helpful for us. And I really realize that work is something that I will always be invested in and that I will continue to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah. I've got a question here, Tara, which it's about post-traumatic growth. And I think this is actually a good segue into this topic of post-traumatic growth. We can come back to my questions in a moment, but what is post-traumatic growth, and how does one acquire post-traumatic growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, because it's a phrase that's really come up a lot more, I think, in the last few years, and previously wasn't really used, certainly around suicide. It was used much more for sort of defense personnel and war and those sorts of things, but not so much around suicide. So trauma is really when something shatters your assumptions about the world, that the world is safe and good, and that good things will happen. And trauma shatters all of that. And the growth that can occur after trauma is about how you accommodate those events into your life, and how it shapes, you know, there are sort of 5 domains of post-traumatic growth. So how it can help you to appreciate the simplicity in life. It can help to build deeper relationships. It can help to give you more meaning and purpose and develop, I guess, your spiritual side. So that's what, you know, it can look different in different people. But I think what's important is that the growth comes because of the struggle, and that you can have post-traumatic stress disorder, which can coexist with growth. So I think that's a really important thing to mention, that, you know, I think we all want to skip the bad bit and go straight to the growth bit kind of thing, and that, hey, we can all just grow. But also that, you know, what we know is that there's no kind of fixed way to go, right, I'm going to experience post-traumatic growth. But there are certainly things that we can do that might facilitate that and help us. And part of that is certainly getting support, and looking after, you know, all the things really that I mentioned, and kind of, I wasn't trying to experience post-traumatic growth, but all of those things we now know can certainly facilitate that process. But often it doesn't really occur till between the primary time after an event that occurs is between 2 and 5 years.
Got another question here. Are you trying to reach a finishing point in your journey, Tara, or do you accept that you're going to have mental challenges, and that there's going to be the post-traumatic growth? They'll always be there.
Yeah, no, I think very much there's no fixed point. I don't look to an end point at all. And you know, really, I think, you know, that whole saying about the journey, not the destination, it's so true, because if you look at what is the ultimate destination, you know, the ultimate destination really is death, or depending on how you view death. And I'm, you know, so I think it is very much about continuing on that. It's a continual process, and it's a continual process of growth. And you know, what I find now is that I'm just so much better at meeting the challenges that face me, better in a way that, you know, I will still get upset if something happens, and obviously depending on what it is and how terrible it is, if you like. But but I will recover so much more quickly and be able to move forward in a way that is constructive, not destructive. Certainly for me, and that is without doubt the difference. And in a way, the greatest skill that I've learned through my experiences is how can I struggle in a way that is growthful, not destructive.
Just going back to your memoir, you wrote some very heartfelt letters in your memoir to members of your family. Can you just talk a little bit about those letters that you wrote and why you wrote them?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were such an important part of my process, really. And they really allowed me to re-script and redefine the relationships with some of my family members. And even with people that had died. And I think that's such an important thing. So I wrote to my father and to my brother and to my mother. And I wrote really many times over several years. And it allowed me to have that continuing dialogue and continuing bond, which I think is so important, especially with people who have died, and to kind of, as I said, redefine those relationships. So I didn't send all of them. I only sent one to my father. But when I wrote that letter, I worked with a psychologist to be able to construct that in a way that was respectful for me and for my father, and allowed me to be not reactive. Letter writing really allowed me to not react from that emotional space about things that were so emotional, and didn't, was most likely to be received in a way that wasn't aggressive. And so I think, that really allowed me to make peace with the relationship with my father and accept him for the person that he was and the father that he was able to be for me, and rather than just seeing what he wasn't able to be for me. And I think, the letters to my mother and my brother did the same. They really, helped for me to make peace with those relationships.
Yeah, they were very moving letters, Tara. They certainly were. I'm going to ask you to read a passage from your book. I think people who are listening will find this a very poignant passage. This is actually the continuation of a passage that you read when we did a podcast a few months ago. So over to you, Tara.
Thanks, Dean. I stand still, looking at my brother, my other half, my mirrored soul, my heart, yet also my burden, my chains, my cloak. I look up ahead of me uncertainly, oscillating between the past and the future, the solitude and uncertainty of the way up versus the familiarity and comfort of the path behind me. Adam nods at me reassuringly. He lifts his hand to take my cloak. I remain still, torn. The wind stops. My brother nods once more in an unspoken gift of freedom. I begin to walk tentatively, checking to look back all the while, still seeing my brother looking at me, nodding, smiling his beautiful, radiant smile. I keep walking, my feet feeling firmer on the ground, looking back less often until I turn and Adam is just a spot on the horizon. I cannot let him go completely. I need to be able to see him, to be able to check he is okay. Just the line of sight, that's all, enough to keep the cord alive.
Thanks, Tara. I can appreciate that's difficult to read for you. Can you just talk a little bit about what's happening in that passage?
I think it was just me acknowledging the struggle to let go, and to let myself be me, and how frightening that was for me and how vulnerable I felt in trying to do that. And that I thought that meant I was losing him all over again. And really it just meant letting go of the story that I had told myself for so many years, that I had to be the person that I thought that he wanted me to be, and to live only for him, and that was really strangling me, and it was about accepting that I could love him, still live for me, and be the person that I wanted to be, that was so desperately trying to get out.
Mm-hmm. Actually, got a very a good question from Sue, who asks, if you could travel back in time, Tara, to visit your younger self, what would you do or say to that younger self?
I would have compassion for myself, and without a doubt, you know, and I would have probably, yeah, I would have compassion for myself, and I would give myself a huge hug and just say, you know what, you're doing the best that you can, and you're not a bad person, and everything. You know, your mum's illness, your father's illness was not your fault. And to just have trust and faith in finding the right people to help me on that journey ahead, and to help find that support sooner, I think. But more than anything, to be kind to myself.
As we said at the start, you know, today is World Suicide Prevention Day. Can you just tell me a little bit about the ripple effects of suicide? I suspect this is something that few people are aware of.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, you know, obviously my whole book really speaks to the ripple of effect, you know, throughout my life. But, you know, we know that over 800,000 people take their own lives every single year, you know, worldwide. And that for every single person that dies by suicide, up to 135 people are directly impacted by that one single death. And so that includes family, it includes friends and colleagues and first responders. And so, you know, according to World Health Organization global suicide estimates, that means that somewhere up to 500 million people can be really impacted by suicide every single year. And, you know, so it's so many people's lives, and that those people that are impacted are then at much greater risk of mental ill health, but also, you know, social isolation as well, and at risk of suicide themselves. And so, you know, when we talk about trying to save one life, you know, we're also really talking about saving so many more lives by doing that. And certainly the burden that suicide creates, we would be reducing that immensely.
So you've been a firefighter for 15 years or so, Tara. We all know that firefighters fight fires, but I think a lot of people probably don't realise that firefighters also have to, they confront the challenge of suicide from the general population. Can you just talk a little bit about that and the impact it has on firefighters?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we go to so many different incidences, not just fires. You know, we go to rescue incidents, we go to hazardous material incidents, we go to car accidents. So there are many different things that we do, and we also assist other first responder agencies like paramedics and also the police. So any one of those types of jobs can involve attending a suicide. And I think what's particularly difficult for firefighters is that it's not something we necessarily expect to encounter on the job. And it's not something necessarily a skill set that we have, that we feel that we can really do anything meaningful to prevent that. And, you know, when you're number one, everything that we do is about protecting and preserving life. And when we turn up to a suicide where invariably we're not able to actually have any effect over the outcome, or that person often is already deceased, it can be incredibly challenging for us. So I think there are many reasons why it can have a huge impact on firefighters.
One of the interesting things that you're doing besides being a firefighter is a PhD. You're halfway through a PhD looking into the impact that those suicides on the job have on firefighters. Can you just talk a little bit about what you've discovered so far, what the research is showing you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the early stages of analysing all the data that I have, but as you said, I'm looking at the impact of suicide on firefighters, you know, not only through the jobs that we attend, but also, you know, when we have sadly lost other firefighters to suicide, and also people have often had their own personal experience of suicide as well. So I'm looking at that real breadth of experience and hearing firefighters' stories. So I sit down in front of them and I hear their stories. And I think what really comes to me so far is that it has such a significant impact on the mental health and well-being of firefighters. And I want to just read a couple of excerpts from some of my interviews with firefighters that I think really speak to this. So this is talking about an exposure of a firefighter to a suicide at work. And he said, "I was ridiculously terrified. I just wanted to run out of there, but I knew I couldn't. I just had this overwhelming fear and concern for my own immediate family, my 2 boys. Could this ever happen to anyone that was significantly close to me? Then I just started to cry. I was just so sad for this boy, so sad for his family, so sad that it really hurt, and I just didn't understand. I was so confused.